Just want to talk a little bit about some tips for driving your M37. So you don't really see people talk about it too much. But these steering wheels are a deadly weapon. So when you turn this wheel all the way over to one side, say you're doing a U-turn, all you have to do is bump the wheel like that, and the wheel will take off like a propeller. And also if you're, say you're driving off-road, you bump into a little bit of a, say a rock, or you hit a pothole or something like that, it could also jolt the wheel. So when you grip the wheel, you don't want your fingers inside here, and you don't want your thumb inside. So it's best to put your fingers into the notches on the back side of the wheel and keep your thumb up here and grip the wheel with your palm. That way you have a good grip on the wheel. You're not going to lose it. But if the wheel does take a jolt, it's just going to jump and it's not going to catch something. Now, when I was about 16, somewhere around thereabouts, I was doing a U-turn and I knocked the wheel and I caught a pinky finger in the spoke. And yeah, it really hurt. It broke. I think it might have actually, thinking about it now, it may have broken these two fingers on my right hand. I can't remember now. I've broken all the fingers of my right hand at some time, but I think it was two of them at that time got caught in the wheel. And it was just like, you couldn't see the spokes when it does that. It spins so quickly. So always grip it like that. If you have to make a turn, you can do like the old time truck drivers did and spin it with your palm. But just don't drive around like this. Sometimes you'll see people on YouTube, they'll be driving like an old vintage Jeep or an M37 or Dodge Power Wagon or the like, and that's how they'll be gripping their wheel. It's really, really not a good idea. It's a horribly bad idea to do that. It's a practice that people have developed from driving modern vehicles that have the big fat steering wheel and power steering and all the bells and whistles. You have to forget about that when you drive a truck like this. The other thing we'll go on is the shifting. So you can see this one has a little bit of play back and forth. I'll just put it in a gear here. So there's a little bit of play in the shifter. So there's a little pin in the side of the shift tower that actually engages with well, it's a two-piece shift lever, and there's a stub that comes out of the transmission, and then the top of the the shift lever itself is actually detachable. You just take a bolt out and you can lift it off to facilitate removal of the engine and transmission as a unit. So you don't have to disassemble anything out of the transmission when you're pulling everything. But that's actually a high wear point because it's just a little pin. So when you're shifting with these things, because it's such a long shifter, there's a lot of leverage involved. It puts a lot of strain on that little pin if your technique isn't right. So when you shift, don't grab the knob like this and yank it back and forth. Put your thumb and fingers like such and just gently move the shifter. So that's your first. And then just pull it straight back to second. And when you do third, go over like such. And then pull straight back to get into fourth. And when you go into reverse, of course this is a Canadian truck, so reverse is over into the top right. So same thing, you just push the shifter all the way over and push up. There's no need to yank on the shifter and fight with. You have to kind of let it do its own thing. And the other thing about these too is they don't, like modern vehicles have like the spring-loaded shifter, so when you put it like this, it goes like that and then pull straight back to second. And on a modern vehicle, you would push the shifter forward and it would automatically spring to where second or to where third would be. But these, you actually have to move it manually into the shift pattern. So it's something to keep in your mind when you're driving these things for the first time before you get used to it. And the other thing is, don't shift this like you're like the Fast and the Furious or something. You see people like when they're going through the gears, it's absolutely retarded. That burns out your synchros and your transmission. It's really hard on everything. These are fairly widely spaced gear ratios in these transmissions. So what you want to do is, say you're in first, and you would shift, pause, and then second. Now, I don't use the clutch at all when I shift generally, up or down. But if you do use the clutch, you don't have to double clutch. It is synchro mesh. The Canadian truck is synchroed in 2, 3, and 4. The US truck isn't synchroed in second at all. But I don't double clutch the shifts if I do use the clutch for upshifts. All you have to do is just stop in neutral for a bit, pause and let everything slow down, then shift. Then you don't eat up your synchros or anything like that. Now, downshifting, synchro mesh or not, you should always double clutch your downshifts in these, just because it's such a widely, there's so much space between the gear ratios that, again, you'll see people they'll drive an M38A1 Jeep or whatever on YouTube, and they're just driving down the road and they're like when they downshift. You really should stop in neutral, rev your engine up, and then shift it down to your next gear for every downshift. Treat it as it's just like you would a non-synchro transmission when you're going down, because it puts a huge strain on everything when you don't drive it properly. It's really annoying watching people drive these like that, and they just don't have a clue really. And whenever you're driving your truck, always make sure you put your light switch into stoplight. So if you don't have it in stoplight, your brake lights aren't going to work. And of course, on this particular truck, it has turn signals too, so the turn signals don't work when it's not in stoplight. So let's turn on the light switch so you can see nothing there. Now we put it in stoplight, and we have turn signals. And I believe turn signals don't work in blackout either, because you don't want the turn signals to come on and give away your truck when you're driving under blackout conditions. So that's blackout marker, which is the two little lights, and then blackout drive, no turn signals either. But when we put on service drive, we have turn signals. And also, if you put it in stoplight, that also activates the circuit so you can use the panel lights. Let's turn that off. And yeah, that's about it. I just want to go over a few things I've not seen addressed when people discuss these trucks. One too that everyone should keep in mind are these front windows. Summertime, I usually open them up to here or to here, and then you lock them with these thumb screws. They will actually go out to 90 degrees, and you'll see people driving around like that, and it's a really, really horrible idea, because I thought it was really cool when I was younger and I had my front window like that. And yeah, when I hit a bump, the window actually came out of the track at the top, because there's really nothing holding it once the window is all the way out. And I don't know how I didn't end up with the front window breaking actually, but somehow I managed to avoid that. But I had a devil of a time getting everything back together and out in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, you have your big parking brake, which you really shouldn't be using for stopping, but in an emergency, I guess you're not going to be worried about that in an emergency. You're just going to be wanting to stop. But yeah, the big thing I wanted to hit on was just how lethal these steering wheels can be. So it's not something to play around with. Now the steering on these is actually really nice. When like people make a huge issue, oh, you have to upgrade to power steering, or it's not really an issue. I mean, if you, well, mind, I've been driving these things well over half of my life at this point, so maybe I just don't notice it, but some of the things I read on some of the forums are just absolutely ridiculous. Like the guy saying he had to have his friend sit in the middle seat with him to help him turn the wheel because it was so hard. Well, the only way your steering should be that hard is if you're sitting there stationary trying to turn your wheel. And you shouldn't do that with any vehicle, power steering or not. It's a bad idea. It puts everything under a lot of strain. It puts strain on your steering gear. It puts strain on the two drag links. It puts a strain on the idler arm. It's hard on your tires. It's just hard on the whole thing all around. So whenever you're steering, you should always be moving. Even if you just put it in first gear and let the clutch out just a little bit to creep while you apply pressure to the wheel, then your wheels will turn easily. You should never, unless you're like in an emergency or something, like if there's like absolutely no room to turn around or something, maybe you have to sit there and turn your wheels where you're sitting. But even if you do have to do that, two arms on the wheel you can easily do that. So maybe instead of looking for power steering when if you have to have your buddy sit beside you to steer, well, maybe you should send away for a Charles Atlas course, or or eat more oatmeal, or have a can of spinach with you or something. You could keep a can of spinach in the pouch hanging off the back of the cab here or something. But yeah, that's just absolutely ridiculous. And once you're on the road and moving at speed, you just don't even... Actually, you do notice the difference because the steering feels a lot better. Where I really notice the difference is in wintertime, when the road is icy, you can instantly feel the feedback through the steering wheel and know when you're on black ice, even if you can't see it, because you can feel it through the steering wheel before anything, and then you know to slow down. I drive this truck year-round, glare ice in the wintertime quite often, snow, and yeah, it works out really well for me. This thing will go through 18 inches of snow and two-wheel drive, no problems whatsoever. But yeah, it just seems absolutely absurd. Like, you have the simplest steering mechanism around. There's no need to complicate things by adding power steering to this truck. And when you don't have very much horsepower to begin with, it's even more ridiculous adding something that's going to take some power away from your vehicle. So I don't really... Maybe if you say maybe you've got one arm, or you've got some kind of degenerative disease where your muscles are withering away or something, maybe that'd be a handy thing. Or in that case, maybe you should just have a vehicle like a Jeep that is lighter and has easier steering. The other thing I should address, I'm 6'2" and 260 pounds thereabout, and I'm about the maximum size that will fit comfortably in this vehicle. If I were 6 feet, say 6'5", I wouldn't be able to drive this without lowering the seat. And I can get my leg up on the clutch, no problem. There's enough room without my leg hitting the steering wheel. One problem that I used to have frequently with my old truck was the door handle faced forward, and whenever I stepped on the clutch, my leg would open the door up, which, you can imagine how exciting that gets in a vehicle without seat belts when you're driving fast. So what I did with this one is I just took the door handle off and I pointed it backwards. So now you push down to open it. So that is a concern if you're buying one of these, like if you have a huge belly, or if you're 6'6" or something, maybe you should really consider getting a different truck. If you had a big belly, your stomach would probably be in the wheel all the time. And you don't really want to go to a smaller wheel either, because the M37 steering wheel is already fairly small by old truck standards. It's actually quite a bit smaller than that on a Jeep. And oddly enough, the Jeep also has more reduction in the steering gear too. The Jeep has more turns from stop to stop, and it has a larger wheel. So the M38A1 Jeep has a really, really easy steering, but you have to turn and turn and turn the wheel to make a turn, which is kind of annoying. I actually prefer the steering on the M37. And once you drive one of these trucks for a while, you probably you won't even notice that it's not power steering. And when you do go back after driving one of these for a long time, when you drive a truck with power steering, it's really annoying. You find that you're always oversteering all the time. Like, say this truck here is so nice to drive. It stays right on course, and you don't really have to do anything with the wheel. You can, say if you want to look over at the airport or something while you're driving by, and if there's a plane landing, you can do so safely in this truck without the truck steering off on its own. Modern vehicles, not so much. But you should always have your eyes on the road anyway, but as we all know, sometimes something will distract you while you're driving, and that will keep you safe here anyway. It won't take its own course. And there's not too much else to go over. I think that's about it, actually. If any of y'all have any questions about these things, just ask me. I can make you a special video about anything you want to know about on this truck if you want.